We will call our meeting of the California Board of Accountancy Mobility Stakeholder Group to order. And item number 1 on the agenda is a roll call, and I will start with Mr. DeLizer. Jeff DeLizer, present.
Dominic Franzella.
Jose Campos.
Katrina Salazar.
Sean Lewis.
And then we've got one member by phone. Stuart, if you wish to introduce yourself.
Sure, I'd love to. Stuart Waldman.
Thank you. Is there anybody else on the phone? Thank you. With that, we have a quorum. And then just one reminder, a light tap on the green or red button there will either mute or unmute your microphone. And just as you're going to ask for comment on anything, let's just make sure your light is green so that everybody can hear you. Item number 1 is approval of the minutes of the July 25th, 2019 Mobility Stakeholder Group meeting. It's under item 11B. I would entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Got a first and a second to approve the minutes as presented. Any questions, comments from the public? With that, we'll call for a vote.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
Jeffrey DeLizer,
Yes.
Dominic Franzella,
Yes.
Sean Lewis,
Yes.
Jim Sanji,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
and Stuart Waldman.
Yes.
With that, motion carries. Thank you. Item number 2 on the agenda is discussion and possible action to initiate a rulemaking to amend Title 16, California Code of Regulations, Section 19, practice privilege forms for individuals. Mr. Franzella?
Thank you, and good morning. So item 2 is a request from the MSG to recommend to the board and the board's adoption to initiate a rulemaking to amend Title 16, California Code of Regulations, Section 19, and incorporate a form by reference. So just a little bit of background. So as part of the legislation that made mobility permanent, specifically Senate Bill 795, it created a method to for the CBA through a majority vote to require licensees from a particular state to provide notification and pay a fee prior to exercising a practice privilege. Under present mobility, notification and fee are not required. This notification would be done if the CBA determines that allowing a CPA or the CPAs from a particular state violates the CBA's consumer protection mission. So the agenda item before members today is to adopt the text in the form that is incorporated by reference. And so attachment 1 is the regulatory text to amend CBA Regulation 19, and attachment 2 is the notification form that would be incorporated by reference. The actual item before members, this is the second time we've used this particular style of an agenda to initiate a rulemaking. The idea behind it is it provides, it has 2 benefits. One, it allows staff to create what's called basically an initial statement of reasons that underpins the regulatory information, and it goes into the regulatory file, and it provides background and rationale as to what the nature of the rulemaking is, the factual basis, any underlying documentation, and some of the regulatory benefits, economic impact, fiscal impact, and so on. So it is a little bit more, it's a little bit longer than the general agenda items that we do for initiating rulemakings. Also, it has information in there that members will see as duplicative. We restate a lot of things because each section requires us to do that. But it simplifies the process for staff later because we can come back and immediately start initiating the rulemaking and having those materials put together. So looking specifically to the crux of the information in the item, really on pages 4 and 5, it indicates 5 sections that make up the form and provides a rationale for each of the sections. Specifically, Section A is the contact information. Section B is the state of licensure. Section C relates to safe harbor. Section D relates to acknowledgement, and Section E is a penalty of perjury statement. Staff did its best and sought to streamline the form as much as possible. with the largest section really being the acknowledgement section, which provides consent and jurisdiction information to the individual who's submitting the form to the board. And that section, while wordy, is picked up straight from the practice privilege provisions, the mobility provisions themselves. So it just kind of cuts and pastes that information in there. On the safe harbor, it was brought to my attention by the chair that we probably should add so if we look to the form itself in attachment 2 on page, I guess it doesn't have a page number, so on the first page of that attachment, the safe harbor gives 3 options, and those are the 3 options that are allowable by law. But there is obviously the potential that somebody fails to notify us properly, and we should have a section called Other and make a reference to them to attach a written statement as to why they didn't provide notification as required in one of these 3 options. So with that suggestion, I think we should be adding that information in there. The motion that the board or the MSG and the board eventually take should address that as well, just so it's clear that that was part of the proposed text that the board wants to have included in the form. So moving to the actual recommendation that staff are seeking, it's on page 8 of your material, and staff recommend that the CBA make a motion to approve the amended regulatory text and incorporate and form incorporated by reference to Title 16, California Code of Regulations, Section 19, including the addition of a section of other in the safe harbor language. Direct staff to submit the text to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs and Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency for review, and if no adverse comments are received, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, make any non-substantive changes to the package, and set the matter for hearing. One final comment prior to turning it back over to the chair. The law requires that it's a notification and fee. The fee itself would be in a separate section. We haven't identified what the fee would be because we're presently undergoing or trying to secure a fee analysis. So we wouldn't really be able to establish a fee at this time until we're able to go through the fee analysis and then set a fee, at which point we will include whatever fee it is as part of any more global fee changes that we make. And additionally, while this form is here, there will likely be an instruction page on the front of it that covers it. We generally try not to put those in the regulations because then you're beholden to having, anytime you want to make a change to the instructions, you then have to go through the rulemaking process just to make a change to the instructions. So rather than do that, we'll have a separate instruction page that helps them understand certain elements as well as inform them that there is a fee requirement that they need to be made aware of. So with that, I turn it back over to the chair and I'll do my best to answer any questions members may have.
Thank you very much. Question, Ms. Salazar? Your microphone.
Well, thank you for the reminder. Mr. Francel, I have a question in section C in that safe harbor section that you brought our attention to. In the instructions, it says, please identify the date you began or will begin practicing in the state of California, but only the second box has a space to include a date. Does that make sense? Should there be estimated dates in the first option, or is there a thought process to why it's structured that way?
Yeah, so the first one indicates that they're submitting it prior to, so there's really not a need to have a date there. The second one, obviously, we have included the date simply to make sure it falls within the 5-day period of when they submitted it. The other one is just them personally attesting to the fact that it fell within that 60-day allotted time period. So I didn't feel the date was necessary there. The other will have a date because we'll end up having what that date is and then some written explanation.
So just clarifying, don't forget, put a date if there is a date
Yeah.
asked for. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Mr. Sanji?
I just two things, comments on the section D. I just thought it read a little weird. By submitting this form, you're acknowledging to the information, or you're acknowledging you agree with the information. I just thought it read a little weird. That's just a comment, and then the other one is, it says down below on the halfway down the page that you shall not provide public accountancy services in the state of California from any offices located in the state of California except as an employee of a firm. And I just didn't know if the definition employee covered a partner or owner
The definition
of employee, because it says if you're an employee, but what if you're a partner? Does it apply to partners of the firm?
I would presume
It's
yes.
not technically, so I just wanted to double check the definition of an employee
Yeah.
includes a partner or.
We don't actually have a definition of employee, so I would presume it would encompass that. Again, this is pulled straight out of the law. We didn't,
Yeah, that's, yeah.
So,
It's
but
just- that could be confusing to someone filling out if they're not an employee.
I'll look at that, and then some of the instruction form can assist in that, I believe.
Yeah, I think I had the same question because generally partners are not considered employees of a firm. And then secondly, the way it's worded about working out of an office, you know, with the exception of working out of your client's offices, it is very typical that a visiting partner would work out of a firm office as well. But Mr. Franzel is right. I mean, when you go back to the regulations that are attached, it comes straight out of the regulatory language. But that's probably a place where the cover instructions might be able to provide some
Agreed.
context, so that'd be good. Any other questions or comments?
I just have a quick question. So this form would be used for those that are in a state that doesn't meet the criteria. Are there currently any states on that list?
No, and in reviewing that law, it would trump anybody on that list once the board makes that determination through that vote. And it could be for any reason that the board determines that it violates the consumer protection, and then we'll make them use that form.
Yeah. Yeah, it's putting a mechanism in place in the event of at this point.
So you're not currently holding forms like this for licensees that are from states that are already on that list? Okay.
No notice, no fee. And the only time they have every individual, regardless of this form, has certain notification requirements if they meet certain disqualifying conditions or pre-notification requirements that relate to certain types of discipline or potentially SEC PCOB action. There's a list of them outlined in one of the code sections, and then everybody has what's called a cessation event or series of cessation events if they have certain discipline or certain actions taken against their license. That'll be those two forms are irrespective of anything that works within this with this form.
Any other questions? Entertain a motion? I take it that Mr. Sanji's motion is maybe as laid out on page 8. So staff had a recommendation about the initiating the process here with the modifications for the safe harbor section of the attachment. That was Mr. Sanji's motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Got a second from Mr. DeLizer. Any further questions or comments? Input from the public? Call for the vote.
Stuart Waldman,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Jim Sonji,
Yes.
Sean Lewis,
Yes.
Dominic Franzella,
Yes.
Jeffrey DeLizer,
Yes.
and Jose Campos.
Yes. With that, motion carries. And just to do a check, I should have done it sooner, but Mr. Waldman, I assume the conversation and you're able to hear everything clearly as we're deliberating on the matters?
It's as if I were there.
Well, thank you. Let's move on to item 3, update and possible action regarding the California Board of Accountancy directed plan related to the ongoing determinations of states' substantial equivalency to enforcement best practices and disciplinary disclosures. We really need to come up with shorter titles for the agenda topics, but item 3, and I think Mr. Franzella again.
Yes, thank you. So this item, as it is so titled, is an update on the, I'm not going to read off that entire
Thank
thing,
you.
those activities. There is, again, no specific action required on this item. However, the CBA, as well as the MSG may wish to provide additional direction or further refine the framework and methodology that it originally adopted and is being used by staff. Again, by way of background, the CBA's first round of determinations for other jurisdictions was made back in July 2017 as part of the original enabling statutes for mobility. and were required by law, and we reported those to the legislature as part of its mobility report that we issued in at the end of 2017. In September, the MSG discussed the collection of necessary information that would assist in ensuring states continue to adhere to the enforcement best practices and disclosure requirements. And the MSG and the CBA adopted the MSG's plan of a risk-based analysis. On page 2 of your materials are the 5 areas that were adopted by the CBA, and the board were adopted by the CBA and staff have been using as the framework. So on pages 2 through 5 are kind of a summary of what staff have done since those were adopted. We reported on these back at, I want to say it was the July meeting, I believe is when the MSG last met. And that was our first kind of round of discussing these topics. So since that time, staff have, beginning with number 1, conduct a review of NASBA's legislative support website to monitor legislation in other states. Staff have continued to perform those functions, both for NASBA as well as the AICPA, focused on the accounting profession and our consumers of the accounting related services. And during the review, staff did identify several jurisdictions that are pursuing law changes that would ease entry into the either occupational or professional licensing. Staff will continue to monitor these and report at future meetings should any changes occur that could be of interest to California. And many of these are as a result of various laws that are trying to either eliminate or get rid of barriers, both for individuals who had criminal convictions or just as part of levels of deregulation that are occurring and being considered by other states. But nothing has really manifested yet, but we're continuing to monitor those. We review, moving on to page 3, review of websites of other state boards of accountancy and CPA Verify to ensure use of disciplinary flags and determine the CBA maintains the appropriate disclosures and disclaimers on its website. So consumer access to disciplinary information of other states was an important part of the mobility program. The 2 main points in the law are 1, ensuring all outgoing links from the CBA website to other state boards include the appropriate disclaimers, and consumers are provided links to locations on other states' websites that will provide the most information about the licensee. We did that back in January and updated our disclosures accordingly. And 2, that the states maintain disciplinary flag disclosures on their respective websites or through CPA Verify. Staff performed the review recently. We did identify that disciplinary disclosure for all states with the exception of 2. These 2 were the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands and the Virgin Islands. Staff will be working with those 2 jurisdictions and NASBA if necessary to determine steps to address this issue, and we'll continue to report back to the CBA and MSG at a future meeting. I was at the NASBA annual meeting at the end of October. I actually spoke with representatives from NASBA on this at that time. They're aware of it, and depending on discussions today, I will report back to them and see what steps are going to be taken or how what can be done to address this.
Did we have any direct conversations with the jurisdictions itself just to confirm our understanding that we don't seem to see this on the internet?
Not yet. We will be. I started with NASBA just because of where I was at the time. As it relates to I want to say it's the Northern Mariana Islands, they no longer maintain a website, which was part of it, and how they report their information on CPA Verify doesn't really comply with what was the form that CPA Verify uses related to that. So we will be circling back with them. NASBA will probably be the easiest because of these 2 jurisdictions specifically, would probably be easiest to communicate through NASBA and work with them to address this issue.
Thank you.
Moving on to, let's see what page. Still on page 3, pages 3 and 4. Monitor cases referred by the CBA to other state boards of accountancy to ensure that proper disciplinary action is taken. As we've noted in the materials, we referred 11 matters to 22 state boards of accountancy. 2 of these matters were referred to 3 state boards of accountancy since the last MSG meeting. 4 matters were referred as a result of residency in that state, but as the individuals were not licensed, their staff are not actively monitoring the outcome. The remaining 7 matters were sent to 20 states, with the oldest matter being referred back in March of this year. We maintain a log of the cases and monitor for disposition, but as these are still relatively new matters for those boards, staff anticipate it will take some time to reach some resolution. As it relates to number 4 on page 4, review of the pre-notification forms related to the SEC and PCOB. The CBA has not received any to date since the board has adopted this plan, so there's no information to report on that. And item 5, report on peer review practices of other state boards of accountancy. As I mentioned last time, the PROC adjusted its out-of-state administering entity review process to make sure that we're doing this on a more regular basis. And since at the last scheduled PROC meeting, it reviewed reports from Georgia and Massachusetts. And the PROC continues to monitor functions and effectiveness of out-of-state administering entities. And we'll be looking at Maryland and Ohio and reporting those at the upcoming PROC meeting. At this time, staff will continue to implement the directives adopted by the CBA. If the CBA wishes to make any changes, staff will initiate those changes prior to any future activities that take place prior to the anticipated March 2020 MSG meeting. And at this point, I will turn it back over to the chair and do my best to answer any questions members may have.
Thank you for that update. So the staff recommendation is just continue the course for the prior direction that the MSG has provided. Are there any questions or comments on the updates provided or any changes to the framework? Hearing none. Ms. Salazar?
I would just say thank you to staff for this. This is a lot of work, and I'm pleased to see the information coming to the committee and am satisfied with this mechanism and like the way it's working. So thank you very much for it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I got to thank you first and second. Wow, nice. No, this is a good lift. I'm glad we're continuing the journey. Any input from the public? Okay, saying none, we will proceed to item 4, which is the mobility activity report. Mr. Franzella.
Thank you. So I believe this is the last one for me. So the Mobility Activity Report, or MAR, is a yearly report. And so right now it's done on the calendar year, unlike other reports the board has, which is on fiscal. So it has 9 months of data as of September 30th, 2019. Their CBA has 4 main functions associated with the mobility program: processing out-of-state firm registrations, providing customer service in response to various telephone calls and emails. We monitor website usage and perform enforcement activities. So looking to page 1 in the out-of-state firm registrations, the CBA has a total of 687 out-of-state firm registrants. We've received 48 registrations, approved 52, and we've renewed 114. And 18 cases have been referred to enforcement for review. As for services to stakeholders, the CBA has received just over 2,500 phone calls and 531 emails that we've handled and processed. Website usage, which is on page 2, we monitor this, and there were just shy of 8,000 searches for out-of-state CPAs and just over 2,000 registered firms. Just over 1,100 individuals have reviewed information related to practice privilege reporting, and one shy of 1,000 have viewed the practice privilege handbook. As for enforcement actions on page 3, the majority of out-of-state matters referred for enforcement investigation as a result of actions by the SEC and PCOB. For the first 9 months, the CBA has identified a total of 17 SEC and PCOB matters that required staff to notify licensees of the need to file a pre-notification form should they seek to practice in California. Enforcement has received 2 complaints against practice privilege holders, and 8 out-of-state accounting firms have reported discipline. The CBA also has revoked 1 practice privilege holder during these 9 months. The last section on the report on page 4 relates to NASBA activities. This was at the request of members, and this is the second time we've included it in the report. Staff have included a list of recent and upcoming NASBA meetings and events in 2019 and 2020. As I mentioned earlier, I did attend the 2019 NASBA 112th annual meeting along with Ms. Corrigan and Ms. Salazar. So that concludes my report, and I'd like to turn discussions back over to the chair.
Thank you for the update. Any questions on the activity report? Just speak up.
All right.
Can't see you in my
Thank you.
blind spot.
Hey, so, Mr. Pincel, on the enforcement activity report on page 3, there's just a big decline in PCAOB discipline identified. Is there any background? I noticed there weren't any reports received since July. Any concerns with that, or is it indication of any changes needed in the future?
So it really is just, it's driven by whatever the PCOB does. So for those two sections at SEC, PCOB discipline identified, one of the requirements in the law, I believe it's section 5097 or 5096.4. It requires us to go on the website twice a year, once every 6 months. We try to do it every month just to keep the cycle going. And we look up what SEC or PCOB is disciplined related to any CPAs. And if they haven't disciplined anybody, then it's maybe an indication of some changes at what the PCOB is looking at, or what they're concentrating on at a particular time. But as for any indications for us, not necessarily.
For confirming our processes are still working and there's no issues that we need to follow up on.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Public input? Thank you. Before going to item 5, I understand our council has a comment back on item 2 of the agenda.
Yes. Oh. So the committee members had discussed the possibility of defining employee, or what the definition of an employee includes for the purposes of Section D under acknowledgement on the practice privilege form. We can go ahead. The agenda item includes approval of this form, so you can define in this form that employee includes a partner for the purposes of practice privilege, and that would be within the permissible part of the implementing the statute.
I mean, I'll render a personal view. I thought the discussion was fine. Given that it's extracted from the law itself, I just thought we could stick to that language and provide clarity in the cover letter to individuals.
Well, I understand your point. The only thing is that by interpreting the statute without putting it in regulation, which the form is incorporated by reference into the regulation, that would then potentially, it wouldn't be as defensible. So if you're going to interpret employee for the purposes of practice privilege in this form without saying so in the reg that's adopted, that has been publicly noticed and commented on, then it's not going to be as defensible if someone wants to challenge it later.
Okay, I understand the input. Mr. Franzella, do you have a comment?
So that same definition existed in the old practice privilege as well, the original back in 2006, I believe, and the same information existed on our old notification form. We, in that decade plus that it was around, didn't have any issues with people raising questions on that particular piece. So I just as background and clarifying.
It's up to you.
information
I
for-
just wanted to let you
No.
know that if you wanted to do that, this would be a good time to do it.
Yeah, I'm probably not inclined to proceed unless any of the members feel a need to, try to deal with that now. I think for a couple of reasons. One, there seems to be some history on this. 2, we don't have any states that would be using this form or any individuals from states. And so I think we hold off unless we see a need to further clarify what's stipulated in the previously approved law for this right now.
Okay.
Any other
Yeah.
views on
My
that?
only comment is I just, reading it for the first time, going
Right.
through it, being a partner in a firm, it just jumped out that I wouldn't have answered I was an employee. So I
Mhm.
would have been confused if I was actually filling that form out going, we need to, since we're partners or owners, maybe we don't have to, it's just employees. So it could lead, but if no one's using it,
Yeah.
I get your point. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Item 5, public comments. Item 6, agenda items for next meeting. Hearing none, we're adjourned. Thank you.